The wind howled through the darkened countryside as the carriage rattled along the muddy road. Rain poured from the sky, drenching the trees and washing the dirt paths clean. Inside the carriage, Evelyn Harrow pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders. The storm had come suddenly, and though she wasn't one to fear bad weather, something about this night felt wrong. She was on her way to Blackthorn Manor, an old estate deep in the mountains. A letter had summoned her, an urgent request from her childhood friend, Henry Whitmore, who had been working as a solicitor. The details had been vague, but the words had unsettled her. "Evelyn, I must speak with you. I fear I have made a grave mistake. Come to Blackthorn Manor at once. Trust no one." Henry was not the kind to panic, which made his words even more troubling. The carriage driver, an older man with a thick beard, glanced at her from the front seat. "We're almost there, miss," he said. Immediately, a group of creatures they had not seen before rushed out from the shadows, rushing to pounce on them. But the carriage driver was fast in his ride to scale through. As they ran a very good distance, they could not see the vampires coming, he said. "I'd be lying if I said I liked the look of that place." Evelyn peered through the rain-streaked window. In the distance, beyond the trees, stood Blackthorn Manor, an imposing fortress of dark stone, its towers reaching into the stormy sky. Lightning flashed, illuminating its silhouette against the mountains. A shiver ran down her spine. The driver pulled the carriage to a stop at the iron gates. "This is as far as I go," he muttered. "If you need to leave, take the road back before nightfall." Evelyn nodded, stepping down into the wet ground. She gripped her small leather bag and pushed open the creaking gates. The path leading to the manor was lined with statues, weather-worn figures of angels and beasts, their faces half erased by time. As she reached the heavy wooden doors, they opened before she could knock. A man stood there, tall and still as a shadow. He was dressed in a long black coat, his dark hair damp from the rain. His pale face was striking, sharp features, and deep-set eyes that gleamed like embers in the dim light. "You must be Miss Harrow," he said, his voice smooth and deep. Evelyn hesitated. "Yes, I came to see Henry Whitmore." The man nodded. "I am Lord Sebastian Vale. Henry is here, but I'm afraid he is unwell. Come inside before you catch your death in the rain." Evelyn stepped past him, her boots echoing in the grand entrance hall. The manor smelled of old wood and candle smoke. The air was colder than it should have been. As Lord Vale shut the doors behind her, she felt an odd sensation, a whisper of something ancient, watching her from the shadows. She had a feeling her life was about to change forever. Evelyn followed Lord Vale down a long hallway, her boots clicking softly on the stone floor. The air inside the manor was thick and heavy, as if the walls held secrets no one dared to speak. Candles flickered along the corridor, casting long shadows. Strange paintings lined the walls, dark forests, stormy seas, and portraits of people with cold, unreadable expressions. "Where is Henry?" Evelyn asked. Lord Vale's steps slowed. "He is resting in his room. He has been troubled." "Troubled how?" Lord Vale turned his head slightly, his piercing eyes meeting hers. "He has seen things that cannot be unseen." Evelyn's stomach tightened. What had Henry gotten himself into? They reached a tall wooden door. Lord Vale pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit bedroom. A fire burned low in the hearth, but the room felt cold. Henry lay on the bed, his face pale and gaunt. His dark hair was damp with sweat, and his breathing was uneven. When he saw Evelyn, his eyes widened with relief. "Evelyn," he croaked, trying to sit up. She rushed to his side. "Henry, what happened to you?" He gripped her hand, his fingers trembling. "I made a mistake," he whispered. "I should never have come here. You shouldn't have come either." Evelyn glanced at Lord Vale, who stood silently near the door, watching. "What are you talking about?" she asked. Henry swallowed hard. "This place, it's cursed." His breath caught, and his eyes darted toward Lord Vale. He hesitated as if afraid to speak. Lord Vale stepped closer. Henry needs rest, he said. You should let him sleep. Henry's grip tightened. No, listen to me, Evelyn. You have to leave, now. Evelyn frowned. I'm not leaving you like this. Henry's eyes filled with desperation. You don't understand. He's not what he seems. None of this is what it seems. A cold wind swept through the room. Though the windows were shut, the candles flickered wildly, their flames twisting as if disturbed by an unseen force. Evelyn shivered. Lord Vale exhaled softly. You are tired, Henry. You need rest. Henry's body suddenly went rigid. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed against the pillows. His breathing slowed, deep and unnatural. Evelyn gasped. What did you do to him? Lord Vale's face remained calm. I did nothing. The mind breaks when it sees too much. Evelyn's heart pounded. Something was very wrong here. She looked back at Henry, at the way his body lay so still. The room felt darker than before, the air too thick to breathe. Lord Vale stepped closer. It is late. You should rest. Tomorrow I will answer your questions. Evelyn hesitated. Every instinct told her to run, but where? The storm raged outside and Henry was too weak to move. She took a slow breath. Fine, she said, but I'm not going anywhere until I know the truth. Lord Vale smiled slightly. As you wish. But as he led her to a guest room, Evelyn had the sinking feeling that she had already stepped too far into the shadows. And there was no turning back. Evelyn lay awake in the grand but unfamiliar bedroom. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows on the stone walls. The storm outside had lessened, but the wind still howled through the trees. She could not sleep. Henry's warning echoed in her mind. You have to leave. He's not what he seems. Her eyes moved to the heavy wooden door. Lord Vale had been polite, but something was unsettling about him. His quiet presence, the way Henry had seemed afraid to speak in front of him. She needed answers. Slipping out of bed, she wrapped her cloak around her shoulders and stepped into the hallway. The manor was silent, the air thick with the scent of old wood and wax. The candles along the walls had burned low, their flames barely alive. She moved carefully, keeping her steps light as she made her way back toward Henry's room. As she neared the door, she heard something. A voice, low and whispering. She pressed herself against the cold stone wall, listening. Should not have come here, the voice murmured. She will ruin everything. Evelyn's breath caught. Another voice, smooth and calm, answered. She will not leave, not yet. Lord Vale. Evelyn dared to peek around the corner. The hallway was empty, but the shadows near Henry's door seemed deeper than before, shifting unnaturally. A chill ran down her spine. The whispering stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. Then slowly the door to Henry's room creaked open. Evelyn held her breath as Lord Vale stepped out. His face was unreadable, his sharp eyes scanning the hallway. For a terrible moment, she thought he would see her. But then, without a word, he turned and disappeared down the corridor. Evelyn waited until his footsteps faded. Then, heart pounding, she slipped into Henry's room. The fire had died out completely. Henry lay still on the bed, his face pale as the moon. His chest rose and fell, but he looked different, too still, too quiet. Henry, she whispered, shaking his shoulder. He did not stir. Fear gripped her. She placed her fingers against his wrist. A pulse. Slow, but there. But something was wrong. The air in the room felt heavy, pressing against her skin like unseen hands. The shadows in the corners seemed alive, and there, on Henry's neck, a mark. 2 small punctures. Evelyn jerked back, her breath quickening. The truth hit her like ice. Lord Vale wasn't just hiding something. He was the danger. She had to get out. Now! Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest. She stepped away from Henry's bed, her breath shaky. The mark on his neck, it could mean only one thing. Lord Vale was not just a man. He was something else. She had to leave. Moving quickly but silently, she turned for the door. But as her fingers touched the handle, a cold voice spoke behind her. "You should not be here, Miss Harrow." Evelyn froze. Slowly she turned. Lord Vale stood in the doorway, his tall figure blocking the exit. The candlelight flickered over his face, casting deep shadows. His dark eyes were unreadable. Evelyn forced herself to stay calm. "What have you done to him?" she asked, her voice steady. Lord Vale tilted his head slightly. "I have kept him alive." She clenched her fists. You fed on him." The words felt strange in her mouth, but she knew they were true. Lord Vale's expression did not change. "I took only what was necessary." Her skin prickled. "Necessary for what?" He sighed, stepping closer. "For him to stay. If I had wanted him dead, he would be dead." Evelyn swallowed hard. "You expect me to believe that?" Lord Vale gazed at her for a long moment. Then, with a slow, graceful movement, he extended his hand toward Henry. Evelyn's breath caught. Right before her eyes, Henry's pale skin warmed. His breathing deepened. Color returned to his cheeks. It was as if he was waking from a long sleep. Evelyn's pulse raced. She didn't understand what she was seeing, but she knew one thing. Lord Vale had power, more than any human should. She took a step back. "You're a monster." Lord Vale didn't flinch. "Perhaps." The silence between them stretched. The storm outside had calmed, but inside the manor, the tension was thick as fog. Then, to her surprise, Lord Vale turned toward the door. "You may leave if you wish," he said quietly. Evelyn blinked. "What?" "I will not stop you," he said. "The gates are open. The road is clear." Her mind screamed at her to run, to take Henry and escape. But deep inside, another voice whispered, "Why is he letting you go?" She hesitated. "Why?" Lord Vale glanced at her, something unreadable in his gaze. "Because, Miss Harrow, I want you to stay." Evelyn shivered. She had come to Blackthorn Manor searching for the truth. Now she was trapped between fear and curiosity, and she wasn't sure which one was stronger. Evelyn stood frozen, her breath shallow. Lord Vale's words echoed in her mind. "I want you to stay." She didn't trust him. She couldn't, but something about the way he spoke, the way he watched her. It was not the look of a man who wanted to harm her. Henry stirred on the bed, his eyelids fluttering. Evelyn rushed to his side. "Henry?" she whispered. He groaned softly, his face still pale but no longer lifeless. His eyes opened, just a little, hazy and unfocused. "Evelyn?" She squeezed his hand. "I'm here." Lord Vale remained near the door, watching them. "He will wake fully by morning," he said. Evelyn turned to him, her jaw tight. "What did you do to him?" Lord Vale exhaled softly. "I told you. I kept him alive." She narrowed her eyes. "By taking his blood?" He nodded. "It was necessary." "Necessary for you," she snapped. Lord Vale stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "No, Miss Harrow. Necessary for him." Evelyn frowned. "What do you mean?" Lord Vale studied her. Then, after a long pause, he said, "Henry is sick." Evelyn's breath caught. "No, that's not possible." Lord Vale's expression remained unreadable. "Did you not notice how weak he was before he came here? The exhaustion? The fevers?" Evelyn felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. It was true. Henry had been unwell for months. The doctor had called it a lingering illness, but no medicine had helped. Lord Vale continued, "His body was failing, but my blood keeps him alive." Evelyn's hands trembled. "Your blood?" He nodded. "A small price to pay for life." A heavy silence filled the room. Evelyn looked at Henry, his face peaceful, his breathing steady. Could it be true? Had Lord Vale saved him? She swallowed hard. "What are you?" Lord Vale's lips curled slightly. "You already know the answer." Evelyn's throat tightened. The truth was staring her in the face. Undeniable now. Lord Vale wasn't human. He was a vampire. And yet, he had not killed Henry. He had saved him. Evelyn's mind swirled with questions, with fear, with something else she couldn't name. Then Lord Vale spoke again, his voice lower this time. "Stay, Miss Harrow. Just for a little while. Long enough to understand." Evelyn looked at Henry, then back at Lord Vale. She should run. She should take Henry and leave this place forever. But deep down, she knew the truth. She wasn't ready to go. Not yet. Evelyn sat beside Henry, watching his slow, steady breathing. His skin had more color now, and he no longer looked like a man at death's door. Lord Vale's words still echoed in her mind. "My blood keeps him alive." She didn't want to believe it, but how else could she explain what she had seen? Lord Vale stood quietly near the fireplace, his dark eyes studying her. "You are afraid," he said. Evelyn straightened her back. "Of course I am. You expect me to trust you after what you've done?" "I expect you to see the truth," he replied. Evelyn glanced at Henry again. He looked peaceful, healthier than he had in weeks. But at what cost? She took a deep breath. "What happens if we leave?" Lord Vale was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Henry will not survive long without my help." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket. "You're saying he needs your blood?" "Yes." Her stomach twisted. It felt wrong, unnatural, but if it meant keeping Henry alive. She looked up at Lord Vale. "And what do you want in return?" For the first time he hesitated. Then softly he said, "Your time." Evelyn frowned. "My time?" Lord Vale stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "Stay here. Learn the truth about me. About my kind." Her heart pounded. "And if I refuse?" He met her gaze. "Then you and Henry are free to go." Evelyn studied his face looking for deception, but he seemed sincere. He wasn't keeping them prisoner. He was giving her a choice. She swallowed hard. If they left, Henry might die. If they stayed, she would be trapped in a house with a creature she barely understood. Neither choice felt safe, but only one could save her brother. Evelyn took a shaky breath. "I'll stay." Lord Vale gave a small nod. "Then you have nothing to fear from me." Evelyn wasn't sure she believed that, but it was too late to turn back now. The next morning, Evelyn woke to soft sunlight streaming through the tall windows. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the memories rushed back. Henry's illness, Lord Vale's strange power, and the terrible choice she had made. She turned to Henry. He was still asleep, but his breathing was steady, his face calm. He looked better than he had in months. Evelyn sat up, her mind restless. If she was staying, she needed answers. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Henry, and made her way out of the room. The manor was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of old wood and candle wax. As she walked down the hall, she noticed something strange. There were no mirrors, not in the hallway, not in the grand rooms she passed. No reflection, no proof of existence. A shiver ran down her spine. At the end of the corridor, she found an open door leading to a large library. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with books older than anything she had ever seen. And standing by the window, gazing out at the misty landscape, was Lord Vale. He turned when he heard her enter. "You're up early." Evelyn hesitated. She had no reason to be afraid, at least not yet, but being alone with him made her uneasy. "I want answers," she said. Lord Vale studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Ask." She took a breath. "What are you?" His lips twitched slightly. "You already know." "A vampire," she whispered. The word felt strange on her tongue, as if saying it made it more real. Yes." Evelyn swallowed. "And Henry? You're saying he'll die without you?" Lord Vale's expression darkened. "His illness is not ordinary. It is a sickness of the blood. The doctors could not cure him because their methods were useless against it. My blood, however, slows its advance." Evelyn felt a lump in her throat. "So you saved him?" For now, she wrapped her arms around herself. How long will he need you? Lord Vale's gaze softened, just a little. That depends. If he continues to receive my blood, he may live a long life. But without it, his time will be short. Evelyn's stomach twisted. Henry had always been strong. She had never imagined a future without him. She looked at Lord Vale, searching his face for cruelty. But there was no malice in his expression, only patience, as if he had lived too long to be surprised by fear. Why are you helping us? She asked. You could have let him die. Lord Vale was silent for a long moment. Then he said, because I know what it is to lose someone. His voice was quiet, but there was something in it, something old and full of pain. Evelyn's heart clenched. She had expected a monster, a cold and heartless creature. But standing before her was something else entirely. A man who was neither good nor evil. A man who had seen too much. And perhaps a man who was just as trapped as she was. Evelyn stood in the library staring at Lord Vale. His words lingered in her mind. Because I know what it is to lose someone. There was sorrow in his voice, a weight that only time could bring. She hesitated, then asked softly, who did you lose? Lord Vale's gaze darkened. He turned away, looking out the window. For a long time he said nothing. Then at last he spoke. A long time ago, I had a family. A wife. A child. Evelyn's breath caught. She hadn't expected that. What happened? She asked. Lord Vale's jaw tightened. They were taken from me. She could hear the pain beneath his calm words. By who? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, men like me. Evelyn shivered. Other vampires? Yes. Her hands clenched into fists. Why? Lord Vale turned to face her. Because power always has a price. Evelyn swallowed. She had spent her life thinking of vampires as monsters, creatures that hunted in the night, feeding on the innocent. But now, standing before her, was a man who had once been a husband, a father, a man who had lost everything. She should have been afraid, but instead she felt something else. Pity. Lord Vale stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. Do you understand now? He asked. Evelyn held his gaze. I don't know what to think. He nodded slightly as if he had expected that. Then stay a little longer. See for yourself. Evelyn hesitated. She should have said no. She should have walked away. But she didn't. Because deep down, she knew the truth. She wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. Evelyn spent the next few days in the manor, watching, listening, and trying to understand. Henry was recovering. He was stronger, eating well, and even walking around the room. Every time she saw the color in his cheeks, she reminded herself why she had stayed. But the longer she remained, the more questions filled her mind. Lord Vale was not what she had imagined. He did not stalk the halls like a monster. He did not hurt the servants. He did not threaten her. Instead, he was patient, watchful, and strangely gentle. One evening, she found him in the library again, seated in a tall chair, a book resting in his hands. He did not look up when she entered. You have questions, he said. Evelyn hesitated. Yes. Lord Vale closed the book and placed it aside. Ask. She took a deep breath. How old are you? His lips curved slightly. Older than I appear. She frowned. That's not an answer. He studied her for a moment, then said, nearly 200 years. Evelyn felt a chill run through her. 200 years. How could someone live that long? She shook her head. That's impossible. Lord Vale leaned back in his chair. And yet here I stand. Evelyn swallowed. Were you always like this? His expression darkened. No. Her heart pounded. Then how did it happen? For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then quietly he said, I was betrayed. Evelyn stared at him. By who? Lord Vale's eyes grew colder. Someone I trusted. She waited for him to say more, but he did not. A silence stretched between them, heavy and unspoken. Evelyn shifted uncomfortably. Is that why you saved Henry? Because someone once failed to save you? Lord Vale's gaze flickered with something unreadable. Then he said, perhaps. Evelyn wasn't sure what to believe anymore. She had come here fearing a monster. But now she was beginning to wonder if the real monster had been the man Lord Vale used to be. And if somehow he was trying to make things right. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside. Shadows flickered across the walls from the candle on the bedside table. Henry was breathing peacefully beside her. He was getting stronger every day. But at what cost? She turned onto her side, her mind racing. Lord Vale had saved Henry. He had not harmed her. He had even answered her questions. But he was still a vampire, and she was still trapped in his world. A sudden noise broke the silence, a soft creak outside the door. Evelyn sat up, her heart pounding. She listened. Another sound. Slow footsteps moved down the hall. Carefully, she slipped out of bed, grabbed the candle, and crept toward the door. She opened it just a crack and peered outside. The hallway was dimly lit, the air heavy with stillness. But someone was there, a figure moving toward the end of the corridor. Not Lord Vale, someone else. Evelyn's breath caught as the figure stopped in front of a door, the door to the library. Then in a flash, they disappeared inside. Her pulse quickened. Who was that? She hesitated, then stepped into the hall, her bare feet silent against the cold floor. Slowly, she made her way toward the library, careful not to make a sound. She reached the door and placed her hand on the handle. Then, suddenly, a hand grabbed her wrist. Evelyn gasped, spinning around. Lord Vale stood behind her, his face calm, his grip firm but not painful. His red eyes burned in the candlelight. You should not be here, he said softly. Evelyn swallowed hard. Who was that? Lord Vale was silent for a moment. Then he whispered, someone who does not belong. A chill ran through her. Go back to your room, Evelyn, he said. His voice was steady, but there was something in his eyes. Something that looked like concern. She hesitated. Are we in danger? Lord Vale's jaw tightened. Not yet. Not yet. Evelyn wanted to ask more, but something in his tone stopped her. She took a shaky breath, nodded, and turned back toward her room. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that something was coming, and that she might not be ready for it. Evelyn barely slept that night. The image of the shadowy figure haunted her thoughts. Who were they? Why had Lord Vale stopped her from seeing them? And why had he looked worried? By morning, she had made up her mind. She needed answers. After making sure Henry was still resting, she left their room and made her way downstairs. The manor was quiet, the long hallways empty. She hesitated at the library door, then slowly pushed it open. Inside, Lord Vale stood by the tall bookshelves, speaking in a low voice to someone hidden in the shadows. Evelyn took a careful step inside. The stranger turned. It was a man, tall, thin, with dark hair and sharp features. His eyes were not red like Lord Vale's, but a strange, piercing silver. He studied Evelyn with quiet interest. Ah, he said, the lady of the house. Evelyn's stomach twisted. Something was unsettling about him. Lord Vale's expression was unreadable. Evelyn, this is Victor. Victor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. A pleasure. Evelyn crossed her arms. You were in the hallway last night. Victor chuckled. Clever girl. Lord Vale shot him a warning look. That's enough. Evelyn frowned. Who is he? Victor tilted his head. I'm an old friend. Friend? She repeated, looking at Lord Vale. His face remained cold. Victor and us have history. Victor smirked. You make it sound so dramatic. Evelyn's heart pounded. Something wasn't right. Why are you here? Victor's smile widened. To see how much of my brother remains. Evelyn froze. Brother? She turned to Lord Vale, her mind racing. He said nothing. Victor leaned closer, his silver eyes gleaming. He didn't tell you? Evelyn's throat went dry. Lord Vale and Victor were brothers. And Lord Vale had never mentioned him. Why? Evelyn stared at Lord Vale. Is it true? He didn't answer right away. His face was calm, but his eyes held something unreadable. Yes, he said at last. Victor is my brother. Evelyn's heart pounded. Why didn't you tell me? Victor chuckled softly. Because he didn't want you to know. Lord Vale shot him a sharp look, but Victor only smirked. Evelyn turned back to Lord Vale. Why? He hesitated. Then he said, Because Victor is dangerous. Victor placed a hand over his chest, mockingly. Oh, brother, you wound me. Evelyn clenched her fists. Then why is he here? Victor smiled. To see you, of course. Her blood ran cold. Lord Vale stepped between them. You will leave. Victor sighed. So serious, always. But no, I don't think I will. Evelyn could feel the tension in the room. It was like standing between two wild animals, both waiting to strike. She took a slow breath. What do you want, Victor? Victor turned his silver eyes to her. I want what was taken from me. Evelyn frowned. What does that mean? Victor's smile faded. I was supposed to be the heir. Evelyn blinked. The heir? Lord Vale's voice was cold. It doesn't matter now. Victor's gaze darkened. Oh, but it does. He looked at Evelyn. My dear brother took everything from me. Our father's favor, our family's power. And then he left me to die. Evelyn's breath caught. She turned to Lord Vale, searching his face. Lord Vale didn't deny it. Victor's voice was quiet but full of something dark. Now I am here to take back what is mine. Evelyn felt a chill down her spine. She had thought Lord Vale was the most dangerous man she had met. But now, standing in front of Victor, she wasn't so sure. The room was silent. The air felt heavy, filled with something dark and unspoken. Evelyn looked between the two brothers. Lord Vale was tense, his fists clenched at his sides. Victor stood calmly, watching, waiting. Finally, Lord Vale spoke. You shouldn't have come. Victor smirked. And yet here I am. Evelyn's mind raced. Victor was his brother, a brother he had betrayed. But why? She swallowed hard. What happened between you two? Lord Vale didn't answer. Victor chuckled. Ah, so he hasn't told you. How rude. Evelyn's heart pounded. Tell me. Victor stepped closer, his silver eyes gleaming. A long time ago, we were human, two noble sons raised in a powerful family. But our family had a secret. Evelyn listened, afraid of what she would hear. Victor's voice was smooth, almost amused. Our father made a deal with darkness. He wanted power and immortality. So he chose one of us to carry that curse. Evelyn's stomach twisted. And he chose? Victor's smile faded. Me. She blinked. But you're not? Victor's gaze hardened. Because my dear brother stole it. Evelyn turned to Lord Vale, her breath caught in her throat. Is that true? Lord Vale's expression didn't change. I did what had to be done. Victor's voice was sharp. You took my fate, my burden, and then you abandoned me. Evelyn felt dizzy. Lord Vale hadn't been turned by force. He had chosen this. He had taken the curse from his brother. But why? She looked at him, searching his face. Why did you do it? Lord Vale's jaw tightened. Because I couldn't let it happen to him. Victor's laughter was cold, and yet you became everything you feared. Evelyn's mind spun. Lord Vale had tried to save his brother, but in the end, he had become the very thing he wanted to protect him from. She suddenly understood. The guilt, the sorrow in his eyes, the reason he had saved Henry. Lord Vale wasn't just trying to escape his curse. He was trying to make up for what he had done. Victor's smile returned, but there was no warmth in it. Now tell me, dear brother, do you regret it? Lord Vale met his gaze, his voice steady. Every day. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Evelyn's heart ached. She had thought Lord Vale was a monster. But now she wasn't sure who the real monster was. Victor sighed. Such a shame. But don't worry, brother. I will take back what is mine soon enough. Evelyn stiffened. What do you mean? Victor's silver eyes flicked to her. You'll see. Then with a slow smile, he turned and walked out of the library, leaving only silence behind. Evelyn let out a shaky breath. He's not going to leave us alone, is he? Lord Vale's face was grim. No. She swallowed hard. What do we do? Lord Vale's red eyes burned with quiet determination. We prepare for war. Evelyn sat by the fire, her hands gripping the arms of the chair. Lord Vale stood near the window, staring out into the night. He had barely spoken since Victor left. She couldn't stay silent any longer. What does he want? She asked. Lord Vale didn't turn around. Revenge. Evelyn swallowed. On you? And everyone close to me, he said, finally facing her. His eyes were dark with worry. That includes you and Henry. A chill ran down her spine. Then we need to stop him. Lord Vale nodded. But Victor is clever. He won't strike openly. He will wait until we are weak. Evelyn thought for a moment. So we strike first. Lord Vale gave a small, humorless smile. You are braver than most. She stood up. I'm not brave. I'm afraid. But I won't sit and wait for him to destroy everything. For a moment, Lord Vale just looked at her. Then he nodded. We need allies. Allies? There are others like me, he said. Some who regret what they have become. They will fight against Victor. Evelyn hesitated. More vampires? Yes. The idea made her uneasy, but she pushed it aside. If Lord Vale was different, maybe others were too. How do we find them? She asked. Lord Vale's expression hardened. I know where to start. By the next morning, preparations were underway. Lord Vale would leave that night to find the allies they needed. Evelyn stood in the candlelit hallway as he put on his long coat. Are you sure you should go alone? Lord Vale buttoned his coat. It will be faster and safer for you and Henry if I don't draw attention to the manor. Evelyn frowned. I don't like this. He met her eyes. I will return. She took a slow breath, then nodded. Be careful. Something flickered in his expression, something she couldn't name. Then without another word, he turned and disappeared into the night. Evelyn watched until he was gone. Then she whispered, Come back to me. But she wasn't sure if he would. The manor felt different without Lord Vale. The halls were too quiet. The shadows seemed darker. Evelyn sat by the fire, trying to read, but she couldn't focus. Every sound made her heart jump. Henry sat beside her, rubbing his tired eyes. Will he come back? Evelyn forced a smile. Of course. Henry frowned. What if the bad man comes first? Victor. Evelyn's stomach tightened. Then we will be ready. Henry didn't look convinced, but he nodded. I don't like this place. Evelyn sighed. Me neither. But they had no choice. She tucked Henry into bed, then sat by the window, staring into the darkness. Waiting. Lord Vale had to come back. He had to. A knock at the door made Evelyn's heart stop. It was past midnight. No one should be visiting. She grabbed a lantern and moved cautiously toward the entrance. The air was thick with silence. Another knock. Slow. Steady. She swallowed hard. Who's there? No answer. Her fingers trembled as she unlocked the door and pulled it open. A man stood in the fog. He was dressed in dark clothes, his face hidden under a hood. He didn't move. Evelyn gripped the lantern tighter. What do you want? A low voice answered. To help. She hesitated. Who sent you? The man lifted his head slightly. His eyes were gold, not red like Lord Vale's, or silver like Victor's. "I bring a message," he said, "from Lord Vale." Evelyn's breath caught. "Where is he?" The man hesitated. Then he said, "He's in danger." Evelyn's hands tightened around the lantern. "What do you mean? Where is he?" The stranger glanced over his shoulder as if checking for something in the darkness. Then he stepped closer. "He was taken," he said. Evelyn's blood ran cold. "Taken? By who?" "Victor." Her heart pounded. "No, that's not possible. Lord Vale is strong." The man nodded. "Yes, but Victor was prepared." Evelyn swallowed hard. "Where is he now?" The stranger hesitated. Then he said, "I can take you to him." Evelyn hesitated. She didn't trust this man. She didn't even know his name. But if he was telling the truth, she had to go. "Wait here," she said. "I need to get Henry." The stranger shook his head. "No, the boy must stay." Evelyn frowned. "I won't leave him alone." The man's golden eyes were serious. "Victor doesn't know about him yet. If you bring him, he will." Evelyn's breath caught. He was right. She clenched her fists. "Fine, but if this is a trap..." "It's not." She didn't believe him, but she had no choice. She turned back toward the house, whispering a silent promise to Henry. "I will come back." Then she followed the stranger into the night. The road was rough, the air thick with mist. Evelyn kept her hand on the dagger hidden beneath her cloak. The stranger walked ahead, silent. His movements were too smooth, too fast. He wasn't human. Finally, she broke the silence. "Who are you?" The man didn't turn around. "A friend." "That's not an answer." A pause, then, "My name is Elias." Evelyn frowned. "How do you know Lord Vale?" Elias finally looked at her. "Because I was once like him." Her steps slowed. "You're a vampire." "Yes." Evelyn's grip on her dagger tightened. "Why are you helping me?" Elias gave a small, sad smile. "Because I know what it's like to want redemption." She didn't know what to say to that. They walked in silence until at last a dark castle appeared through the mist. Evelyn's heart pounded. Lord Vale was in there, and she was going to get him back. Evelyn stared up at the dark castle. The stone walls were high, covered in ivy. The windows were black, empty, like soulless eyes. A cold wind blew through the trees. The air smelled of rain and something else, something rotten. Elias stopped beside her. "Victor is inside." Evelyn swallowed. "And so is Lord Vale." "Yes." She took a deep breath. "How do we get in?" Elias pointed to a side path. "There's an old servant's entrance. It will be unguarded." Evelyn nodded. "Then let's go." They moved quickly, keeping close to the shadows. The path was narrow, lined with dead trees. Every step felt heavier, like the castle itself was trying to pull her back. Elias led the way to a wooden door, half hidden by vines. He pressed his hand against it. The door creaked open. Evelyn's heart pounded. This was it. They stepped inside. The hallway was cold and damp. The air smelled of old stone and something metallic. Blood. Evelyn shivered. Where would they keep him? Elias scanned the darkness. The lower chambers. Victor likes to keep his prisoners underground. Evelyn tightened her grip on her dagger. Then we start there. They moved quietly through the castle. Every shadow seemed alive. Every whisper of wind like a voice calling her name. Footsteps echoed ahead. Elias pulled her into the darkness, pressing a finger to his lips. 2 guards passed by. Their eyes glowed red, their skin pale as death. Vampires. Evelyn held her breath. The guards didn't stop. They disappeared down another hall. Elias whispered, "Come, we must be fast." They slipped through a doorway and found a spiral staircase leading down. The air grew colder with each step. At the bottom, a heavy door stood before them. Elias placed his hand on the wood. "He's here." Evelyn's pulse raced. She grabbed the handle and pulled the door open. The room was dark, lit only by a single torch on the wall. Chains rattled. Evelyn's eyes adjusted to the dim light. Lord Vale was there. He was slumped against the stone wall, his wrist chained above his head. His coat was torn, his face bruised. His silver hair was damp with sweat. Her breath caught. Vale! He lifted his head slowly. His red eyes flickered with surprise. Evelyn! She rushed to him, her hands reaching for the chains. We're getting you out. He gave a weak smile. I knew you would come. Elias moved beside her. Stand back. He gripped the chains. His fingers darkened, his nails lengthening into claws. With a sharp pull, the metal snapped. Lord Vale fell forward. Evelyn caught him. His body was cold, too cold. She held his face. Can you walk? He took a shaky breath. I'll try. Elias helped him stand. We need to move now. But before they could take a step, a slow clap echoed through the chamber. Evelyn turned. Victor stood in the doorway, smiling. Victor stepped into the room, his dark coat flowing behind him. His silver eyes gleamed with amusement. Well, well, he said. I must say I expected Lord Vale to try and escape, but I did not expect you, Evelyn. Evelyn's heart pounded. She stood in front of Vale, shielding him. Let us go. Victor chuckled. And why would I do that? Elias stepped forward, his golden eyes narrowing. You have no reason to keep him. Victor raised an eyebrow. No reason. He is my enemy. He tilted his head. And what about you, Elias? Are you my enemy too? Elias said nothing. Victor sighed. Such a shame. You used to be loyal. Evelyn gripped her dagger. We don't have time for this. Victor smirked. You're right. He snapped his fingers. From the shadows, figures appeared. Red-eyed vampires, at least 6 of them, blocked the exit. Evelyn's stomach tightened. It was a trap. Elias moved first. In a blur, he slammed into the nearest vampire, knocking it to the ground. Evelyn grabbed her dagger, swinging at another. The blade cut across its arm, but the vampire barely flinched. Vale, still weak, leaned against the wall. Evelyn! I'm fine, she shouted, dodging an attack. Elias tore through the guards with terrifying speed, but more vampires rushed in. Victor watched, smiling. He wasn't fighting. He didn't need to. Evelyn slashed at a vampire's throat. It stumbled back, hissing, but another grabbed her wrist, twisting her arm. She cried out. Then suddenly, Victor was in front of her. Faster than she could react, he grabbed her throat and lifted her off the ground. She gasped, struggling. His grip was cold as ice. Vale pushed himself off the wall. Let her go! Victor ignored him. He studied Evelyn with interest. You're stronger than I expected, he murmured. Perhaps that's why he cares for you. His fingers tightened. Evelyn's vision blurred. Then Victor dropped her. She collapsed to the floor, coughing. When she looked up, Victor was staring at Vale. But something was different. His smile was gone. His eyes, so cold before, looked almost sad. Why did you betray me, Vale? Victor whispered. Evelyn's breath caught. What? She looked at Vale. His face was pale, his red eyes full of pain. Vale swallowed. Because I could not be like you. Victor clenched his fists. We were brothers. Evelyn froze. Brothers! Her heart pounded as the truth hit her. Lord Vale and Victor. They were family. And now they were enemies. Evelyn stared at them, shocked. Vale and Victor. Brothers? Victor's silver eyes darkened. You should have stayed by my side, Vale. Vale took a deep breath. I couldn't. His voice was strained. Not after what you did. Victor's jaw tightened. I did what was necessary. Evelyn looked between them. What happened between you? Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Vale said, We were once the same. His voice was quiet. Both turned against our will. Both trapped in the darkness. Victor's hands curled into fists. And yet, you chose to fight it. Yes, Vale said. I chose to change. Victor let out a cold laugh. Change? He shook his head. You think you are better than me because you pretend to be something you're not? I chose not to become a monster, Vale said. Victor's eyes flashed. Then what does that make me? Silence. Evelyn's chest ached. She saw it now, the pain behind Victor's anger. He wasn't just cruel, he was hurt. But she also knew something else. Vale had spent years trying to make up for his past, trying to be better. Victor had only let himself sink deeper. There was no turning back for him. Evelyn gripped her dagger. It doesn't matter who you were before, she said. Right now, you're the one hurting innocent people. Victor looked at her, his expression unreadable. And you are the one standing in my way. He took a step forward. Elias moved to block him, but Victor lifted a hand. Elias froze, his body locking in place as if an invisible force held him. Evelyn's breath caught. What? Victor's power was stronger than she thought. Vale tried to move, but he was still weak. Victor smiled. This is over. Evelyn's heart pounded. She had to do something. Then an idea came to her. It was risky, but it was the only way. She took a deep breath and ran straight at Victor. Victor's eyes widened in surprise. At the last second, Evelyn dropped to the ground, sliding beneath his arm. Before he could grab her, she slashed her dagger across his side. Victor hissed, stumbling back. The moment his focus broke, Elias gasped and staggered forward. He was free. Evelyn didn't stop. She grabbed Vale's arm and pulled him toward the door. Elias, go, she shouted. Elias didn't hesitate. He moved in a blur, knocking down the vampires blocking the way. Victor growled, Stop them! The remaining vampires rushed forward, but Elias was too fast. He cut them down before they could reach Evelyn and Vale. They ran, through the dark halls, up the winding staircase. The castle shook with Victor's rage. You cannot escape me! Evelyn ignored him. The exit was ahead. Almost there. Then a blast of wind slammed into them. The doors flew shut. Evelyn gasped, turning back. Victor stood at the end of the hall, blood dripping from his wound. His silver eyes glowed. You cannot win, he said softly. You will never win. The air around him crackled with dark energy. Elias stepped forward, fangs bared. Vale straightened, his red eyes burning. Evelyn tightened her grip on her dagger. This wasn't over. Not yet. Victor's power filled the air, making it hard to breathe. The torches flickered. Shadows stretched along the walls, twisting like living creatures. Evelyn's heart pounded. She gripped her dagger tighter. Victor's cold gaze locked onto Vale. You were always weak, brother. Vale took a step forward, his red eyes glowing. No, I was always stronger than you. Victor smirked. Then prove it. In a flash, he lunged. Elias moved first. He met Victor in midair, their bodies crashing together. The walls trembled. Victor snarled and threw Elias aside. Elias hit the ground hard, groaning. Evelyn didn't wait. She ran forward, swinging her dagger. Victor dodged easily. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. Brave, he murmured, but foolish. Pain shot through her arm as his grip tightened. Then Vale attacked. He moved faster than she had ever seen, his fist slamming into Victor's face. Victor staggered back, releasing her. Vale didn't stop. He struck again and again, forcing his brother backward. Victor's silver eyes burned with rage. You think you can defeat me? Vale didn't answer. He grabbed Victor by the collar and threw him across the room. Victor crashed into a stone pillar. Dust rained down. Evelyn ran to Elias. Are you okay? Elias coughed but nodded. Finish this. She turned back. Victor was already rising, his coat torn, blood on his lips. He wiped it away, smiling. Not bad. Vale's chest rose and fell heavily. This ends now. Victor chuckled. Oh, little brother. Then his smile faded. I was never the one who needed saving. The air around Victor shifted. Dark energy pulsed from him, spreading like a shadow. Evelyn's stomach twisted. He was changing. His skin turned paler, and his veins darkened. His silver eyes became pure black. His fangs grew longer. Vale's hands clenched into fists. "Victor, don't do this." Victor's voice was hollow. "It's too late." Then he vanished. Evelyn gasped. "Where did he—" Before she could finish, Victor reappeared behind Vale. His hands shot forward, claws aimed at Vale's heart. Vale turned just in time, but he was too slow. Victor's claws sank into his chest. Evelyn screamed, "No!" Vale's eyes widened. Blood dripped from his mouth. Victor's face was blank. "Goodbye, brother." He pushed him away. Vale fell. Elias caught him before he hit the ground. Evelyn dropped to her knees beside him. "Stay with me," she whispered, pressing her hands over the wound. Vale's breath was shaky. His red eyes softened as they met hers. Victor watched, his expression unreadable. Elias growled, "You'll pay for this." Victor didn't respond. Then something changed. Victor took a step back. His hands trembled. His black eyes flickered and turned silver again. His gaze fell on Vale, bleeding in Evelyn's arms. His brother. For the first time, real pain filled Victor's face. "What have I done?" he whispered. Evelyn's breath caught. Victor looked afraid. He turned, his hands gripping his head. This wasn't supposed to happen." Elias moved toward him. Victor vanished. Gone. The castle fell silent. Evelyn looked down at Vale. "Hold on, please." Vale gave a weak smile. "Evelyn." His voice was fading. "No," she whispered, her vision blurring with tears. "You're not leaving me." His fingers brushed against hers. Then his body stilled. Evelyn froze. Her heart stopped. "No, no, this couldn't be happening." Elias lowered his head. "He's gone." Evelyn shook her head. "No, he's not." Her hands tightened around Vale. She refused to believe it. She couldn't. Then a soft glow surrounded Vale's body. Evelyn gasped. "What?" Elias's eyes widened. "His body?" The glow grew stronger. Warm, golden light wrapped around Vale, covering him completely. Then he breathed. His chest rose. His red eyes opened. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. "Vale." His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm still here." Tears spilled down Evelyn's face. He was alive. Elias let out a shaky breath. "How?" Vale looked at his hands, then at Evelyn. "The curse." His voice was stronger now. "It's breaking." Evelyn's eyes widened. "You mean—" Vale sat up, touching his chest. The wound was gone. His skin was warmer. His red eyes were turning human. He stared at his reflection in the polished dagger beside him. Then he laughed. A real, joyful laugh. For the first time in centuries, he turned to Evelyn, wonder in his eyes. "I'm free." The sun rose over the castle. Light filled the halls, chasing away the darkness. Victor was gone. Vale was human again. And Evelyn, she smiled, holding his hand. "What now?" Vale took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on his skin. "Now," he said, "we start over." Elias smirked. "I suppose I'll have to get used to you eating normal food now." Vale chuckled. "I suppose you will." Evelyn squeezed his hand. "We should leave this place." Vale nodded. "Together." And with that, they stepped out of the castle, into the light. A new chapter of their lives was beginning. Ours, one filled with hope. One where darkness no longer ruled. And for the first time, they were free. Please like and subscribe for more stories. Put on the notification button.